All right, let's keep going. So we were just talking about uh, ferns and horsetails and things like that. These are seedless vascular plants. So let's go over some of their features. So since they're vascular, they evolved the first vascular tissues. And we have vascular tissues in our body, like in our circulatory system. And these are tissues that transport nutrients. So these allowed plants to live away from water and grow larger. And so we have a couple different types of vascular tissues, which would have been like vocab words this week, or actually will be, but there will be no quiz. Xylem, I don't know where they came up with that word, but xylem is the tissue that moves water. So we can see some xylem fibers here and in this drawing. And then phloem are the tissues that move the nutrients. And so one way, if you were going to memorize it, is I say like phloem moves the food. So the nutrients are the food. And let's see where we're going here. And so this is a stem. It's like a model of a stem. And we see the xylem is on the inside and the phloem is more on the outside. And this kind of ties into something that we eat. So at this point, I probably would, in lecture, would be talking about what is a food that we eat that comes from the phloem of certain trees. And some people get kind of stuck. And then I might say something like, well, maybe it's not a food we would eat, but it's like something we would put on our food. And usually then somebody realizes we're talking about syrup. And so the phloem of maple trees has a lot of sugar in it. And that's why we tap into maple syrup. And so I guess I don't know if any other tree has like more sugar running through the phloem. I would assume it's not, because otherwise we'd eat other kinds of plant syrup. But just so you know, like all the mainstream brands, those are not real syrup. They're not tree syrup, at least. They are high fructose corn syrup. And on some level, to me, that seems kind of like false advertising. But I mean, it is a form of syrup, but it's not, unless it actually says it's maple syrup and is like very specific. It is high fructose corn syrup, which is basically like pouring soda or candy on top of your pancakes. Okay, they also evolved the first specialized organs. So I talked about how they have organs earlier. So roots are the underground organ that absorbs water and nutrients, and we actually do eat some roots. So most of you can probably tell what this is. This is a carrot. And now you might understand why sometimes there's little like threads on the carrot. Well, because those are little root threads coming off of it. And then you can probably tell over here we have potatoes. And you guys know I've talked about organic farming before and the pollution and stuff. And one of the things, this is actually a new, really important thing, at least for me personally. So I would highly recommend you guys, take this into consideration or mention it to your parents. I've heard a lot in the last year or so that the root plants in particular, the roots that we eat, carrots and potatoes, onions, radishes, I guess if you eat those, I don't really eat those, but that those are the most likely to have a lot of those pollution chemicals that are on the farms, because that's the part of the plant that's absorbing the chemicals, right? And so as the chemicals come into the soil, like if we look at the carrot, they're going to go right into the carrot, right? And so not sure why it took me so long to kind of think of this, I think, but now I basically, any kind of root plant, like again, carrots and potatoes in particular, and onions, I will only eat organic now because of this, very logical concept that I finally heard, not that long ago, that the roots are going to be, that we eat, are going to be the ones that have the highest concentration and amounts of those farming chemicals. This is a picture just to show how just kind of crazy and complex root structures can be. I think it's underwater. Okay, stems are supportive organs that help transport water and nutrients. So they're kind of supporting everything as well as moving everything around. Hold on a second. Sorry. And this one actually has a lot of like defenses on it. So plants have evolved defenses like thorns, as well as little chemical defenses. And so If we look over here, we see the xylem and the phloem, which we talked about before. So stems are going to have a lot of xylem and phloem moving the nutrients around. And what this picture kind of reminds me of is stinging nettle. And usually I bring this up in class, and I'm like, if you've touched stinging nettle, you know you have. And then I'll be like, how many people here think they have? And there's always some hands that go up. And then some people realize it later when I describe it, and it kind of has this weird, like, tingly chemical burn feeling. And when I've always hit it, I was kind of crawling around in like the bushes and things like that, kind of running around as a kid, and just like kind of around creeks and just kind of getting off the trail. And next thing you know, you're like, boom, and you get this like zing on your hand or something. And this is usually probably some of you right now, you're like, oh, I know what he's talking about. And anyways, it can be weird and unpleasant. And if you've never touched it, someday when you will, you'll notice that kind of zing effect. And it's definitely kind of weird. So in here, inside this stem, we can see that actually these little spots are the xylem and the phloem, which are moving the nutrients. Then we have leaves, which are our photosynthetic organs. And these are very analogous to our circulatory system, our nervous system, things like that, because they have this same branching effect. So this kind of branching that exists in some of our organ systems, we also see it taking place in leaves. And it's kind of interesting too, because it's sort of like reminds me of, I don't know, like a city from above, like from a plane or a drone, because we have all these like little roads, and then they lead to bigger roads, which lead to like the main road. And in some cities from the sky, you can basically kind of see the same thing, where maybe the main road is like the freeway or something. And these are the main plants that we think our fossil fuels came from. So during the Carboniferous period, we had our first forests, and they were kind of like swamp forests, like we see over in this picture. And they were giant ferns and other vascular seedless plants, like ferns. And these were about the Carboniferous, and it's partly why it's called the Carboniferous is because there was large amounts of carbon being stored up in these swamps, and then we're able to burn that carbon as fossil fuels. And so what we see is a couple different factors over time, and then also different levels of pressure, and then also different levels of heat will transform the fossil fuels into different things. So there's peat, and like Ireland has a lot of peat, and you can actually burn it. You can like just pick it up out of the ground and burn it. And which I've never done. It seems like it'd be too wet, but I guess maybe if you let it dry out for a while, it actually works. I don't know much about lignite. I don't think that's something we really use, but maybe in some parts of the world. But then obviously coal and oil and things like that. So it is the remains of these forests that we believe have transformed over time, pressure, and heat into like coal and oil.